The aging hull of HSV Serendipity groaned as it drifted through the empty void of space. Captain Hanbin Lee sat in his worn command chair, rubbing his temples while staring at the holographic display of the Carina sector. Their mission was simple: find new mining sites, mark them, and move on. No complications, no surprises, just routine work that paid the bills. Another empty system, Hanbin muttered, making a note in his digital log. The ship's old coffee maker sputtered in the corner, filling the bridge with the aroma of slightly burned beans. First Officer Ji-Woo Park was busy at her station, her fingers dancing across the control panel as she plotted their next jump. The bridge crew had fallen into their usual comfortable silence when the first alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the previously calm bridge as the navigation system sparked and died. The holographic display flickered, showing a massive asteroid field that hadn't been there seconds ago. Navigation's down. Ji-Woo's voice carried an edge of panic as her hands flew across the controls. The system's not responding to manual override. Hanbin gripped his chair's armrests. Emergency thrusters now. Get us out of here. The Serendipity lurched as Ji-Woo engaged the emergency systems. The ship twisted and turned, barely avoiding the first wave of asteroids that seemed to appear from nowhere. Each near miss sent vibrations through the hull that made everyone's teeth chatter. Science Officer Sun Mekang held onto her station as another asteroid brushed past them. Captain, these readings don't make sense. The field wasn't here in our initial scan. The ship spun again as Ji-Woo yanked them away from a particularly large rock. The movement sent loose items flying across the bridge, including Hanbin's prized coffee mug, which shattered against a wall. Their artificial gravity struggled to compensate for the wild maneuvers. We need to find a clear path, Hanbin shouted over the blaring alarms. Sun Mei, give me something to work with. Sun Mei's fingers flew across her console, her face illuminated by the rapid-fire data scrolling across her screen. There's something else here, a gravitational anomaly. The Serendipity barrel rolled through a narrow gap between two asteroids, its hull scraping against the space rocks. Warning lights flashed as the ship's outer plating took damage. Ji-Woo's face was covered in sweat as she fought with the controls. The anomaly is pulling us in. Sun Mei's voice cracked with urgency. It's a planet, an unmarked planet. Hanbin watched in horror as a massive blue-green sphere emerged through the asteroid field. The Serendipity, caught in the planet's gravitational pull, began its descent into the atmosphere. Fire licked at their viewport as they breached the upper layers. All hands, brace for atmospheric entry. Hanbin's voice boomed through the ship's comm system. Ji-Woo, try to make this look intentional. The ship's emergency system screamed in protest as they plunged deeper into the atmosphere. Ji-Woo managed to level their descent somewhat, turning their uncontrolled fall into a series of wide spirals. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the clouds parted to reveal vast cities spread across the continents below. Captain, Sun Mei's voice was barely a whisper as she studied her readings. I think we have a situation. These are artificial structures. We're looking at an advanced civilization. Through the viewport, they could see flying vehicles scattering away from their path. Massive buildings reached toward the sky, their architecture unlike anything human eyes had seen before. And everywhere, gathering in streets and on rooftops, were beings looking up at the Serendipity's descent. Ji-Woo's desperate attempt to control their landing had inadvertently created a spectacular show. The ship weaved and turned, its emergency thrusters firing in patterns that, from the ground, looked like an intricate aerial ballet. Trails of ionized atmosphere followed their path, creating beautiful spirals in the sky. They're broadcasting something, Sun Mei reported, her eyes wide as she monitored the local electromagnetic spectrum. The entire planet is lighting up with communications. Hanbin watched helplessly as his simple mining mission transformed into humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. The Serendipity's unplanned arrival, marked by its dramatic dance through their skies, was being witnessed by millions of alien eyes. As they finally leveled out at a safe altitude, Han Bin could only imagine what the aliens thought of their arrival. Their wild descent, born of desperation and failing systems, must have looked like either incredible skill or divine intervention to the watching crowds below. "Find us a place to land," he ordered Jiwoo, his voice heavy with the weight of their situation. "Preferably somewhere that won't cause an interplanetary incident." The Serendipity drifted lower, its damaged systems protesting every movement. Below them, the alien city buzzed with activity. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights converged on open areas, clearing spaces that could serve as landing zones. The ship's unexpected arrival had thrown an entire civilization into organized chaos. There, Jiwoo pointed to a large plaza in what appeared to be the city center. "It's our best option." As they descended toward the plaza, Han Bin realized that their simple mining mission had just become the most important accident in human history. The Serendipity, a worn-out mining survey vessel, was about to become the first human ship to make contact with an alien civilization. "Well," he said, watching the crowds gather below, "at least we made a memorable entrance." The ship touched down with a gentle thud, its landing struts groaning under the strain. Through the viewport, they could see thousands of alien faces turned toward them, their expressions unreadable but their attention absolute. What had started as a routine day in the Carina sector had turned into humanity's most important accident. Han Bin took a deep breath and straightened his coffee-stained uniform. "Sun Mai, start recording everything. Jiwoo, run a full systems check. Whatever happens next, we need to be ready." He paused, looking at his crew's nervous faces. "And someone please tell me we have a first contact protocol manual somewhere on this ship." Do-Young Kim stared at his reflection in the ship's bathroom mirror, trying to compose himself. His hands shook as he straightened his uniform for the 10th time. As the Serendipity's cultural anthropologist, he should have been ready for this moment. Instead, he felt like a student who had walked into the wrong exam. "Do-Young, we need you on the exit ramp." Captain Lee's voice crackled through the intercom. "You're the closest thing we have to a first contact specialist." He took a deep breath, grabbed his tablet, and hurried through the ship's corridors. The rest of the crew was already gathering near the airlock, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. Through the ship's windows, they could see the massive crowd that had formed around their landing site. The aliens were beautiful in an unsettling way. Their skin shimmered with colors that shouldn't exist, like oil on water but somehow more alive. They stood slightly taller than humans, with graceful limbs and large, multifaceted eyes that reflected light like diamonds. "Remember," Captain Lee addressed the crew, "we're representing all of humanity now. Try to look professional." He glanced at Do-Young's trembling hands. "And try not to panic." The airlock hissed open, and the ramp extended down to the plaza surface. The alien crowd fell silent. Thousands of iridescent faces turned toward them, reflecting the planet's twin suns in a dazzling display of color. Do-Young stepped forward, his tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. Years of academic theory raced through his mind, but none of his training had prepared him for this. He raised his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The crowd gasped. At the front, a group of beings wearing elaborate robes fell to their knees. Do-Young froze, his hand still raised, as murmurs spread through the gathering. His nervous habit kicked in, and he ran his fingers through his hair while trying to think of what to do next. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The robed figures began chanting in their musical language, their voices rising in what sounded like religious ecstasy. The crowd followed suit, dropping to their knees in waves, creating a ripple effect of bowing bodies that spread across the plaza. "What did you do?" Captain Lee whispered urgently. I don't know," Do-Young stammered. He gestured vaguely, trying to explain, and accidentally set off another round of gasps and chanting. One of the robed figures approached the ramp. Unlike the others, their skin seemed to shift through every color of the spectrum. They carried a staff made of what looked like living crystal, and their presence commanded immediate respect from the crowd. The being spoke, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Du Young's universal translator struggled for a moment before producing words. The sacred texts speak truth. The gestures of divine wisdom have been shown. You are the ones we have awaited. Du Young blinked in confusion. I'm sorry. What gestures? His translator converted his words into the musical language of the aliens. The high priest, for that's clearly what they were, pointed to an ancient-looking tablet they carried. On it were drawings that, to Du Young's horror, perfectly matched his nervous habits. The first drawing showed a figure with hands raised, exactly like his peace greeting. The second showed the same figure running hands through their hair, his nervous tic. As he watched, growing more anxious by the second, he absently adjusted his collar, scratched his ear, and smoothed his eyebrows. The crowd erupted in religious fervor. The high priest's skin blazed with patterns of light that spread to the other robed figures. The three gestures of contemplation. They announced, "Truly, you are the divine ones." Captain Lee stepped forward. There seems to be a misunderstanding. But Du Young, in his panic, had already started pacing, a habit that involved clasping his hands behind his back and looking upward. The high priest nearly dropped their staff in excitement. "The walking of the stars," they exclaimed. "It is exactly as written." Du Young tried to explain, but every gesture he made only seemed to confirm their beliefs. When he facepalmed in frustration, the entire crowd began weeping with joy, claiming he had shown them the touch of enlightenment. The aliens, who introduced themselves as the Nairi, began bringing forward offerings. Precious metals, strange fruits, and artifacts of incredible beauty piled up at the base of the ramp. Du Young stood frozen, afraid that any movement might be interpreted as another sacred sign. "Perhaps," Captain Lee suggested quietly, "we should ask for directions back to space." Du Young nodded miserably and tried to mime a spaceship taking off. The high priest's skin turned a brilliant gold with excitement. "The divine ones test us," they announced to the crowd. "They show us the path of ascension, but we must prove worthy before they guide us to the stars." "No, no," Du Young tried again, pointing upward more emphatically. "We just need to leave. Go home. Up there." Each new gesture was met with increasingly elaborate interpretations. By the time Du Young gave up and slumped against the ship's hull, the Nairi had convinced themselves that they were witnessing the fulfillment of a 1,000-year-old prophecy. The high priest approached again, their skin now pulsing with patterns that seemed to match Du Young's heartbeat. "Divine One, we have prepared the temple of eternal light for your holy presence. Will you grace us with your wisdom?" Du Young looked helplessly at Captain Lee, who shrugged. The cultural anthropologist turned back to the high priest and tried one last time to explain they were just lost miners. He spread his hands in what he hoped was a clear gesture of denial. "The blessing of the twin suns," the high priest cried out, and the crowd began dancing. Du Young finally gave up and stood perfectly still, afraid to move a single muscle. Next to him, Captain Lee sighed deeply. "Well," the captain said, "at least they're friendly. Just try not to sneeze. Who knows what divine significance that might have." The cultural anthropologist could only watch as his every nervous tic became holy doctrine. Somewhere in the universe, he was sure his old anthropology professors were laughing at him. Tai Ho Yun lay on his back beneath the Serendipity's main engine housing, muttering curses under his breath. The diagnostic tool in his hand blinked red, confirming what he already knew. The navigation system failure had fried half their power relays. Through the open maintenance hatch, he could hear the excited murmuring of the Nairi crowd that had gathered to watch him work. "Sacred One, may we observe your divine labors?" A melodic voice called down to him. Tai Ho sighed, sliding out from under the engine to face yet another group of Nairi priests. Their iridescent skin flickered with patterns of reverence as they watched him hold a simple wrench. "It's just basic maintenance," he tried to explain, but the priests were already sketching his posture and tool placement into their holy tablets. One of them reached out to touch the wrench he had set down, then jumped back as if shocked by divine power. The ship's power core hummed irregularly behind him, reminding him of the urgent repairs needed. The asteroid field encounter had done more damage than they initially thought. As he opened the main power panel, the assembled Nairi gasped in unison. The sacred chamber of light. They whispered among themselves, their skin rippling with excitement as they stared at the glowing power circuits. Taiho tried to focus on his work, but it wasn't easy with an audience treating every adjustment of a power coupling as a religious experience. He connected his diagnostic tablet to the ship's systems, trying to trace the power fluctuations. "That's odd," he mumbled, noticing unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. The Nairi's power grid seemed to operate on principles similar to their own, but with severe inefficiencies. As he studied the readings, he absently began sketching possible solutions on his tablet. The high priest peered over his shoulder, their skin turning a brilliant shade of azure. "The Divine One writes in the language of creation itself." No, it's just basic power distribution theory," Taiho protested, but then noticed something interesting. If he modified the ship's power core to generate a specific frequency, he made the adjustments without thinking. His engineer's mind focused on solving the puzzle. Suddenly, the lights across the entire city brightened. The Nairi's power grid, which had been struggling for decades, surged with new life. Taiho's accidental modification had created a resonance effect that optimized their entire energy distribution system. "The miracle of light," the high priest proclaimed. "The Divine One has blessed our humble technology." Inside the ship, Captain Lee called an emergency crew meeting. They gathered in the conference room, all looking tired and overwhelmed. "We need to leave before this gets worse," Hanbin insisted, rubbing his temples. "Taiho, how long until the engines are ready?" "About that." Taiho shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I may have accidentally solved their energy crisis while trying to fix our power core." "You what?" Ji-Woo Park asked, her eyes widening. "It was an accident. Their system was so similar to ours, and I just made a few adjustments." Taiho trailed off as he saw his captain's expression. The ship's communication system crackled to life. Outside, the Nairi had begun bringing even more elaborate gifts. Crystals that sang with inner light, devices that defied human understanding, and what appeared to be the keys to their most sacred temples. "They're saying we can't leave," Sun Mai reported from her station. "They believe our departure attempts are tests of their devotion." Han Bin ordered them to prepare for launch anyway. As the engines powered up, the Nairi's response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands gathered around the ship, their skin glowing with patterns of supplication. They brought their children, their elderly, their sick, all begging the Divine Ones not to abandon them. Taiho watched from the engine room viewport as the high priest approached the ship again. They carried something that made everyone's jaw drop. A crystal matrix containing what appeared to be the sum total of their civilization's scientific knowledge. "We offer all that we are," the high priest's voice came through the ship's speakers. "Please, Divine Ones, continue to guide us." Han Bin ordered the engines powered down. They couldn't just leave, not now. The situation had become too complex, too intertwined with the Nairi's hopes and beliefs. Back in the engine room, Taiho returned to his repairs, now with an even larger audience. Every tool he picked up was sketched and catalogued. Every muttered comment was recorded as holy wisdom. When he accidentally dropped a wrench, the sound it made was transcribed as a sacred hymn. "Just fix the engines," he told himself, trying to ignore the religious ceremony that had sprung up around his maintenance work. "Focus on the engines." But as he worked, he couldn't help noticing more ways to improve the Nairi's technology. Their power grid could be optimized further. Their manufacturing processes could be streamlined. Their entire technological infrastructure was like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Captain," he called over the comm, "I think we might be here for a while." Why? Hanbin's voice carried a note of dread. Because I just realized their entire industrial sector is running at 10% efficiency, and I don't think I can stop myself from fixing it. The captain's groan was audible even over the sound of the Nairi celebration outside. Taiho returned to his work, accepting that every repair he made to their ship would probably become a new chapter in the Nairi's holy books. As he reconnected another power coupling, he heard the high priest begin another sermon about the divine significance of proper maintenance procedures. Taiho just shook his head and kept working. At least, he thought, they were learning something useful from their worship, even if it wasn't quite what they expected from their gods. Jin Ah Song was organizing her medical supplies for the third time that day when Navigator Yum Ho Choi stumbled into the infirmary, his eyes puffy and red. The local pollen was playing havoc with his allergies, despite the ship's air filters. I can barely see straight, Yum Ho complained, rubbing his eyes. Whatever's blooming out there is worse than Earth's springtime. Jinnah reached for her standard medical kit, pulling out a simple antihistamine injection. The Nairi observers who had taken up permanent residence outside the infirmary windows watched with intense focus, their skin shifting to deep purple, their color of medical observation, as Jinnah had learned. "Hold still," she told Yum-Ho, administering the injection with practiced ease. "This should clear up in about 10 minutes." The Nairi priests started chanting the moment the needle touched Yum-Ho's skin. Their musical language had become a constant backdrop to life on the Serendipity, but this chant seemed different, more urgent. Within minutes, Yum-Ho's symptoms began to clear. His eyes returned to normal, and his breathing eased. It was a routine treatment, something any first-year medical student could handle. But to the watching Nairi, it was nothing short of miraculous. The high priest burst into the infirmary, their skin flashing with excitement. "Divine healer, our people suffer from the sacred pollen affliction as well. For generations, it has plagued us." Jinnah looked up from her medical records, startled. "You mean your people get allergies too?" Before she could explain that antihistamines were basic medicine, the high priest had already summoned a group of suffering Nairi. Their eyes were swollen just like Yum-Ho's had been, their iridescent skin dulled by the allergic reaction. "I suppose I could help," Jinnah said hesitantly, reaching for more antihistamine doses. Each injection caused a new wave of religious fervor among the observers. By sunset, word had spread across the city about the divine healer's miracle cure. The next morning, Jinnah found a line of Nairi stretching from the infirmary entrance across the plaza. They came with all sorts of ailments, not just allergies, but common colds, stomach bugs, headaches. Basic human medicines, things she took for granted, worked perfectly on Nairi physiology. "Captain," she called Hanbin on the ship's comm, "we might have another situation. Please tell me you haven't accidentally become a god too." Hanbin's tired voice replied, "Not exactly, but..." Jinnah watched as a simple vitamin injection caused a Nairi child's skin to burst into patterns of joy. "I may have revolutionized their medical science with basic first aid." Within days, the ship's infirmary had become a teaching hospital. Nairi healers crowded around Jinnah as she explained simple procedures. When she showed them how to use a microscope, 3 of them fainted from religious ecstasy. Her explanation of germ theory was transcribed as sacred text. "It's just basic medical science," she tried to explain while demonstrating how to use antibiotics. Nothing divine about it. But to the Nairi, everything she did was a miracle. When she cured a viral infection with standard antivirals, they named a temple after her. Her medical textbooks were treated as holy manuscripts. Even her habit of washing her hands before procedures became a religious ritual. The situation reached its peak when the Nairi Planetary Council arrived at the ship. Their premier, a tall figure whose skin rippled with official patterns, led a procession of dignitaries to meet with Captain Lee. "The Divine Ones have blessed us beyond measure," the premier announced in their musical language. "First, the sacred engineer brings light to our cities. Now the divine healer cures our afflictions, We humbly offer our world to your guidance and control. Han Bin tried to protest. There's been a misunderstanding. We're just. Such divine humility. The premier interrupted, their skin glowing with reverence. To possess such power yet speak with such modesty. Truly, you are worthy of ruling our world. Jinnah watched from the infirmary doorway as Han Bin struggled to refuse the offered planetary control without causing a diplomatic incident. Each denial only convinced the Nairi further of their divine right to rule. Maybe we should stop helping them, Jinnah suggested during the emergency crew meeting that followed. It's too late, Du Young said, still afraid to gesture while speaking. They're already adapting our medical knowledge into their culture. Even if we left now, your miracles would become the foundation of their medical science. Jinnah spent that night updating her medical logs, trying to make sense of her accidental role as a planetary savior. A small Maori child had come in with a scraped knee, and her simple application of antiseptic and a bandage had been hailed as the blessing of swift healing. I just wanted to help people, she told Yumho, who had come by for another allergy shot. How did it turn into this? Young Ho shrugged, watching the ever-present crowd of Maori outside the window. Look at it this way. You're probably the first doctor in history whose patients actually follow all their instructions perfectly. Jinnah couldn't help but laugh at that. It was true. The Nairi treated every medical recommendation as divine command. Her suggestion to exercise regularly had sparked a planet-wide fitness movement. Her casual mention of a balanced diet had revolutionized their food industry overnight. As she prepared for another day of divine healing, Jinnah realized that despite the religious misunderstanding, she was making a real difference. The Nairi were learning proper medical care, even if they insisted on seeing it as miraculous intervention. Perhaps, she wrote in her medical log that night, being an accidental planetary savior isn't the worst thing that could happen to a doctor. At least my patients take their medicine on time. Ambassador Su Jin Quan stood at the viewport of her diplomatic vessel as it descended through the Nairi atmosphere, watching the gleaming cities spread out below. 2 weeks after the Serendipity's accidental first contact, Earth had finally managed to dispatch its official response team. This should be straightforward enough, she told her staff. We'll establish proper diplomatic relations and help the Serendipity's crew extract themselves from this situation. Her confidence lasted exactly 3 minutes after landing. The Nairi welcoming committee barely glanced at her credentials. Instead, they kept looking past her, as if expecting someone else to emerge from the ship. Their skin flickered with patterns that the cultural attaché translated as disappointment and concern. Where are the divine ones? The head of the committee asked. Why do they send lesser beings to speak for them? Su Jin maintained her diplomatic smile, though her eye twitched slightly. I represent Earth's government. I'm here to establish official relations between our peoples. The Nairi skin shifted to a deep blue of distress, but the sacred engineer promised to explain the mysteries of power today, and the divine healer has scheduled holy treatments. About that, Su Jin began. There seems to be a misunderstanding about the Serendipity's crew. She was interrupted by a commotion near the original landing site. Taiho had emerged from hiding to fix a power coupling, and immediately found himself surrounded by worshippers. His frustrated shout of, "It's just basic maintenance," was met with chants and prostration. The welcoming committee abandoned Su Jin mid-sentence, rushing to witness what they called the sacred act of repair. She watched in disbelief as Taiho's clumsy attempt to escape back into the ship was interpreted as a complex religious dance. "This is worse than we thought," her assistant muttered. Su Jin requested an immediate meeting with Captain Lee and the Nairi leadership. The resulting gathering in the Nairi's Grand Council chamber was a study in chaos. The Nairi High Council sat on ornate crystal thrones, their skin rippling with ceremonial patterns. Captain Lee and his crew were given seats of honor, despite their protests. Su Jin and her diplomatic team were assigned spots near the back, almost as an afterthought. We've prepared the standard first contact protocols. Su Jin began, pulling out official documents. The Nairi leaders ignored her completely, their attention fixed on Du Young, who was trying very hard not to move or gesture in any way. Divine One, the High Premier addressed Du Young. Please share your wisdom with us. Du Young, sweating under the attention, accidentally ran his fingers through his hair. The entire council chamber erupted in religious ecstasy. Su Jin's careful diplomatic speech was drowned out by chants and prayers. Perhaps we should discuss trade agreements. She tried again, only to be interrupted by Jin-Ah entering the chamber with medical supplies. The divine healer brings blessings. Someone shouted, and half the council rushed to receive basic vitamin supplements. Su Jin watched in mounting frustration as her carefully planned diplomatic mission unraveled. Every attempt at formal dialogue was overshadowed by the Nairi's devotion to the accidental gods they'd found in a mining crew. Your ritual gestures lacked the divine spark, a Nairi official informed her when she tried to use their traditional greeting. Observe the Holy One's mastery. They pointed to Du Young, who had just tripped over his own feet. His stumble was immediately added to their religious texts as the dance of humble grace. The final blow to diplomatic protocol came during the evening feast. Su Jin had prepared a formal speech about interstellar cooperation, but before she could begin, Tai-Ho sneezed. The entire banquet hall fell silent. The high priest's skin blazed with light. The sacred sound. They declared, "Quick, record its holy resonance." Su Jin watched her carefully crafted diplomatic mission collapse under the weight of a sneeze. Her team's attempts to establish normal relations were seen as increasingly offensive compared to the divine accidents of the Serendipity's crew. Perhaps, Captain Lee suggested kindly, seeing her distress, we should consider a different approach. Different how? Su Jin asked, watching Du Young accidentally create 3 new religious ceremonies by trying to eat soup. Well, Han Bin said carefully, they seem to respond better to unplanned divinity than formal diplomacy. Before Su Jin could respond, Jin-Ah rushed past with a first aid kit, pursued by a crowd of devoted followers. Tai-Ho's voice echoed from somewhere, shouting, "Please stop worshipping the wrench." The ambassador sat down heavily in her chair, her diplomatic training useless in the face of accidental deification. Years of diplomatic experience meant nothing compared to Du Young's nervous tics and Tai-Ho's maintenance schedule. Send for more antihistamines, she finally said to her assistant, and update Earth that we might need a new approach to interstellar diplomacy. One that accounts for accidental gods. As if to emphasize her point, a cheer went up from outside. Tai-Ho had apparently fixed another power coupling, inadvertently creating a new holy day in the process. Su Jin began drafting her report to Earth, trying to explain how a mining crew's series of accidents had proven more diplomatically effective than years of training and protocol. She had a feeling this would change the way Earth approached first contact forever. At least, she thought, watching Du Young create another sacred gesture by attempting to swat a fly, it would make for an interesting chapter in diplomatic history. Back on Earth, the Emergency Planetary Relations Committee sat in stunned silence as they reviewed Ambassador Kwan's report. The holoscreen displayed images of the Serendipity's crew being worshipped, complete with Du Young accidentally creating 3 religious ceremonies while trying to tie his shoelace. So let me get this straight, the committee chair said, rubbing his temples. A mining survey crew has accidentally become the divine rulers of an entire civilization. That's correct, sir, a junior analyst confirmed, and every attempt to correct the situation just makes it worse. Meanwhile, on the Nairi homeworld, Captain Han Bin Lee stared at his new office in the converted cargo bay of the Serendipity. The Nairi had insisted on decorating it with crystal sculptures and religious artifacts, making it look more like a temple than a workplace. Your divine workspace is ready, announced the high priest, their skin shimmering with pride. Though we apologize for its humble nature. Han Bin looked at the solid gold desk and thought longingly of his simple captain's chair. It's very nice. he managed to say, causing the High Priest's skin to burst into patterns of joy. First Officer Ji Woo Park's suggestion to treat the planet like a mining operation had seemed ridiculous at first, but as Han Bin reviewed the day's reports, he began to see the logic. Instead of religious ceremonies, he categorized them as community outreach. Rather than divine proclamations, they were operational directives. Today's schedule, Captain, his Nairi assistant announced, their skin glowing with professional pride. The divine engineer needs approval for power grid upgrades. The holy healer has requested more medical. In the medical center, Jinnah had adapted to her role with unexpected grace. She'd organized the Nairi healers into an efficient healthcare system, though they insisted on chanting healing prayers while administering basic medications. Remember, she told her students, washing hands is both a sacred ritual and a medical necessity. The Nairi took extensive notes, their skin flickering with patterns of devoted learning. Taiho had turned the planet's infrastructure management into a sort of religious engineering course. His frustrated muttering while fixing machinery was transcribed as technical mantras, and his repair manual had become a holy text. If you're going to worship the wrench, he'd finally declared, at least learn how to use it properly. The resulting training program had produced surprisingly competent engineers, even if they did bow to their tools before using them. The Earth government, after much debate, officially recognized the situation. They created a new diplomatic classification, Accidental Theocratic Advisory Region. Captain Lee's crew received new titles that carefully balanced their unintended divine status with practical administrative roles. Just sign here, Ambassador Quan told Han Bin, presenting the official documents. You're now the administrative divine overseer of the Nairi planet. That's not even a real title, Han Bin protested, but signed anyway. At this point, absurdity had become normal. Ji Woo's practical approach continued to prove effective. She organized the planet's resources like a large-scale mining operation, with departments, chains of command, and clear protocols. The fact that these protocols were treated as sacred law actually made implementation easier. If we're going to be accidental gods, she told the crew during a meeting, we might as well be efficient ones. The Nairi adapted to their new divine bureaucracy with enthusiasm. They created departments for each aspect of their god's wisdom. The Ministry of Sacred Engineering, the Temple of Divine Health, the Academy of Holy Knowledge. Everything ran smoothly, even if it did require an unusual amount of religious ceremony. One morning, as Han Bin reviewed the monthly progress reports, he realized something surprising. The Nairi civilization was advancing rapidly. Their technology, medical care, and education systems had improved more in a few months than in their previous decade. Maybe this isn't such a disaster after all, he mused to Ji Woo during their daily management meeting. Just don't let Du Young hear you say that, she replied. He's still hiding from the followers who want him to bless their research papers. The crew settled into their roles with varying degrees of acceptance. Jinnah's medical protocols became standard practice across the planet, even if they were recited like prayers. Taiho's engineering principles revolutionized their industry, despite being treated as divine revelations. At least they're learning, Han Bin told Ambassador Quan during her monthly check-in, even if they insist on seeing it all as divine intervention. The ambassador had to admit that the situation, while unconventional, was producing positive results. The Nairi were developing rapidly, their civilization advancing under the guidance of their accidental gods. Earth's government has decided to make your position permanent, she informed Han Bin. Congratulations, you're now officially the divine ruler of a planet. Han Bin looked out his office window at the bustling city below, where Nairi engineers chanted Taiho's repair mantras while fixing power lines, and medical students recited Jinnah's prescriptions like sacred texts. You know, he said finally, when I took this mining survey job, I really didn't expect it to end up on my resume as accidental planetary deity. The ambassador smiled. Look at it this way. You might be the first gods in history who actually have to file quarterly reports." Han Bin laughed and turned back to his work, reviewing proposals for new temples that looked suspiciously like efficient administrative buildings. Perhaps being accidental gods wasn't so bad after all, as long as they remembered to fill out the proper divine paperwork. The morning sun cast a golden glow through the crystal spires of the Nairi capital city. The Serendipity, once a humble mining vessel, now stood as a permanent fixture in the central plaza, its hull adorned with symbols that merged human technology with Nairi religious art. Inside his office, Captain Han Bin Lee began his morning routine by practicing his standard opening line. "Before we begin, I must emphasize that this was all a huge misunderstanding." He'd been saying it daily for a year, and still the Nairi took it as a sign of divine humility. Du Young Kim had transformed the ship's small cultural research lab into a thriving center for interspecies understanding. His nervous habits had accidentally created a new form of cultural exchange, where every confused gesture somehow bridged the gap between human and Nairi perspectives. "Today we'll discuss Earth's weather patterns," he told his class of eager Nairi students. When he wiped his brow from the heat, they all copied the gesture, believing it to be a sacred teaching method. Somehow, it worked. In the medical center, Jin Ah Song supervised the graduation of the first class of Nairi doctors trained in modern medicine. They still chanted healing prayers while administering treatments, but their understanding of medical science had grown exponentially. "Remember," she told them, "medicine is about helping people, whether you see it as science or divine intervention." The new doctors nodded, their skin shimmering with pride and purpose. Tai Ho Yun had perhaps adapted best to his role. His engineering division had become a model of efficiency, even if his technical manuals were treated as sacred texts. He'd stopped protesting when the Nairi bowed to their tools, as long as they used them correctly. "The power grid is operating at peak efficiency," he reported during the morning staff meeting. "Though I wish they'd stop calling routine maintenance the sacred ritual of preservation." First Officer Ji Woo Park had transformed their accidental administration into a smoothly running government. Her practical approach had created a system where bureaucratic efficiency and religious devotion somehow worked in perfect harmony. Back on Earth, the Serendipity incident had revolutionized how humanity approached first contact. Training now included modules on accidental deification management and religious misunderstanding protocol. Ambassador Kwan had become a leading expert in what she called divine diplomacy. "The Serendipity Protocol is now required reading at the Diplomatic Academy," she informed Han Bin during her monthly visit. Though nobody quite believes it until they see it in person. The Nairi civilization had flourished under their accidental god's guidance. Their cities gleamed with efficiently distributed power, their people enjoyed unprecedented health care, and their culture had grown richer through exchange with Earth. Do Young's Cultural Exchange Center had become a model for interspecies understanding, even if every lecture involved at least 3 unintended religious ceremonies. His nervous habits had been compiled into a textbook titled The Sacred Gestures of Knowledge Transfer. Jinnah's medical program had spread across the planet, creating a healthcare system that merged modern medicine with Nairi spiritual practices. Somehow, the combination of scientific accuracy and religious devotion produced extraordinary results. Tai Ho had stopped hiding from his followers and embraced his role as the divine engineer. His frustrated outbursts about proper maintenance procedures had become proverbs, repeated by Nairi technicians as they worked. 1 year after their accidental landing, the crew gathered in what had once been the Serendipity's mess hall. The room, now converted into a combination office and informal meeting space, still held traces of their original mining vessel days. "Did you see the latest report from Earth?" Ji Woo asked, showing Han Bin her tablet. "They're using our experience to rewrite first contact protocols. Apparently, accidental conquest is now a recognized diplomatic scenario." Han Bin laughed, something he'd finally learned to do about their situation. At least the next crew that accidentally becomes gods will have a manual to follow. Through the window, They could see the Nyari city stretching to the horizon. Crystal towers gleamed with efficiently distributed power, hospitals combined modern medicine with ancient traditions, and schools taught earth science alongside stories of their divine arrivals. "You know," Ji-woo said, watching a group of Nyari engineers reverently calibrating power systems. "For a complete disaster, this didn't turn out so badly." Han Bin nodded, picking up another agricultural report. The farms were producing record harvests, thanks to the combination of earth farming techniques and what the Nyari called sacred growth rituals. "Just don't let Du Young try to explain human sports again," he replied. Last time, his attempt to demonstrate baseball became a religious festival. As the twin suns set over their accidental empire, the crew of the Serendipity continued their work. They might not have been the gods the Nyari expected, but perhaps they were the ones they needed. A group of confused, well-meaning humans who had turned a cosmic mistake into something remarkable. And if Han Bin still started every morning by declaring it was all a misunderstanding, well, that too had become part of their unique story, the tale of how a lost mining crew accidentally built a better world.